Hey there, and thanks for joining me for another First Five. Today we are in Acts chapter 20. We are getting close to the end of Acts, and I know you might be getting tired and ready to move on, but I promise you there is still some really great and powerful stuff in the chapters ahead. And so that actually reminds me of the passage in this chapter that I'm going to talk about, the story of Eutychus. And that story is found in Acts 20, verses 7 through 12, and it goes like this. On the first day of the week, we came together to break bread. Paul spoke to the people, and because he intended to leave the next day, kept on talking until midnight. There were many lamps in the upstairs room where we were meeting. Seated in a window was a young man named Eutychus, who was sinking into a deep sleep as Paul talked on and on. When he was sound asleep, he fell to the ground from the third story and was picked up dead. Paul went down, threw himself on the young man, and put his arms around him. "Don't be alarmed," he said. "He's alive." Then he went upstairs again and broke bread and ate. After talking until daylight, he left. The people took the young man home alive and were greatly comforted. So just like we may be getting tired toward the end of this book, Acts is getting a little bit long to us maybe. It seems like this man Eutychus is feeling the same way when he's listening to Paul. So here we see that Paul is talking to a local church, and he knows he's leaving the next day. He knows he's never going to see these people again. So he's sharing a lot of information, and his speech is getting rather long. Now we know that Paul is incredible. He's doing great work, and that leads to great results and people coming to know Jesus through his ministry. But sometimes what we found out is Paul talks long, sometimes too long. And this young man, Eutychus, gets super tired, falls out a window, and dies. Now, this might seem all too familiar if you have a child or a teenager, or if you're a teacher and maybe you've seen this. You're talking to this young person and they're just not hearing it. You can tell that they're not with you anymore. They get that glazed over look in their eyes, and they're just disinterested in what you have to say. But here's the cool thing that happens in this passage. When Eutychus, who is quite literally bored to death, falls out of the window, Paul runs down to the young man, throws his arm around him, and says, "Don't worry, he's alive." So what does this mean for us? I mean, I will admit that it seems that young people these days are less interested in faith. Or maybe that's not even completely fair to say, but for sure we know that young people, and probably most people even, aren't interested in hearing long-winded sermons. They, and probably I and maybe you too, can be easily bored and distracted by lots of stuff. So maybe it's more accurate to say that when reaching kids and younger people today, we need to think differently in order to be more effective in connecting with them. So we see here that Paul looks at Eutychus, someone that we might consider to be dead. They've given up, they're bored, completely unengaged and disconnected. But Paul looks and says, there's life in him. But he doesn't just say it, he runs to him. He takes him in his arms, and he believes it. So maybe Eutychus is you, or maybe he's someone you know and someone you love, uninterested, disconnected, bored, complacent. Eutychus sits there listening to Paul and might be saying to himself, yeah, I've heard this before. There's just nothing really appealing about this. There's nothing going on. But then Paul comes along and believes in him. He hugs him. He breathes life into him. So here's my question for us. Is there someone around you today that is so discouraged, so hopeless, needs to know that they are alive and that their life is valuable? Is there someone who needs to be revitalized? Now, when we think of that person, the challenge for us is to do what Paul did. Run to that person, put your arms around him or her, and let's help them and walk with them as the Holy Spirit brings them back to life. That is a miracle to be a part of, and that is worth it. Have a great day.